The night had already fallen over the far edge of the Moroccan desert when Keanu Reeves stepped out of the small taxi that had carried him from the bustling Marrakesh airport to the silent, moon-soaked outskirts of a forgotten town. The wind rolled low across the sand, carrying the scent of dust, dry earth, and distant spices. The driver didn't bother offering a friendly farewell. He simply nodded once, closed the door, and disappeared down the narrow, uneven road, headlights fading into the black horizon. Keanu stood alone with his single travel bag. The house before him, if it could be called a house, stood like a relic from another age, built of thick clay walls, faded red and brown under the lanterns that flickered on iron hooks. It seemed to breathe with the desert itself. Its wooden door was old, carved with intricate symbols he didn't understand. Wind hissed across its surface like whispered warnings. He took a step forward, boots crunching softly on the sand. This place was supposed to be quiet, isolated, perfect for slipping away from the noise of cameras, fans, tabloids, and the constant pressure that clung to him even when he tried to run from it. His friends had told him to take a break, to vanish for a month, maybe two, somewhere safe, somewhere no one would look for him. Morocco had seemed like the perfect answer. Inside, the house greeted him with cool air and dim light. Lanterns hung from wooden beams, their glow trembling, across carpets woven in patterns that made the floor look like a tapestry of red storms and golden waves. The walls were decorated with cracked pottery and faded tapestries that must have been older than the country he came from. For the first time in weeks, Keanu let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He dropped his bag beside an old carved table and rubbed his tired eyes. The silence of the desert was powerful, almost too powerful. A man could hear his own heartbeat in a place like this. He walked to a small window and pushed it open. The night air slipped in, cool and soft. Outside, the moon hung low and heavy above the dunes, turning them silver. The town around him was eerily quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no distant traffic, just the whisper of sand shifting across ancient stones. He liked it. He needed it. As he leaned against the window frame, he let the calm settle into him. No reporters, no agents, no producers begging for last-minute meetings or changes to scripts, just silence and the promise of a peaceful night. But then, barely audible, he heard something. A faint crunch of sand, a shadow moving near the gate. He narrowed his eyes, staring into the darkness, but saw nothing except the shifting shapes the wind carved across the dunes. Probably a stray dog, he told himself, probably nothing still. Unease prickled at the back of his neck. Like a cold finger tracing his spine, he closed the window slowly. It was just the first night, and something in the air already felt wrong. The wind grew stronger as the Moroccan night deepened, slipping through cracks in the ancient walls like a living thing searching for a way inside. Keanu sat at the wooden table with a cup of mint tea he had brewed himself, the aroma filling the room with a refreshing sharpness. The lantern beside him swayed gently on its hook, casting restless shadows across the floor. He tried to focus on the warmth of the tea, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the silence he had traveled thousands of miles to find. But the silence wasn't behaving tonight. There was something about the way it stretched, tense, stretched thin like a wire ready to snap. Every sound felt too loud. Every shadow felt too alive. Another soft crunch outside. He froze, cup halfway to his lips. This time, it wasn't the wind. He knew enough about the desert to understand its language already. The wind made long, sweeping sounds, but the noise he heard was quick, sharp, like a footfall. Someone stepping carefully. Someone trying not to be heard. He set the cup down slowly. The ceramic clicked faintly against the table, and even that tiny sound felt intrusive in the fragile quiet. Keanu stood, every muscle tightening with instinctive caution. He moved toward the window, again, and pushed the wooden shutter, open just enough to peer through. The desert lay before him, stretching endlessly, a dark ocean of dunes and shifting sand. The moon floated bright, casting long shadows that danced with every breeze. He saw nothing. No figures, no lights, no movement. But he felt something, an unease crawling beneath his skin. He closed the shutter, slower this time, as if afraid the night itself might hear. He turned to the door next, checking the lock. Old but sturdy. He tested it twice. Still locked. He exhaled. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe the stress he thought he had left behind had followed him across the Atlantic. Maybe his mind was manufacturing threats out of habit. Still, he walked to the far end of the house, where the walls were thicker and the shadows deeper. There, an old brass lantern hung above, a dusty shelf of books left by previous guests, travel journals, poetry collections, maps worn down by time. He lifted the lantern and lit it, the flame blooming softly inside the glass. The extra light helped, until it didn't. A sudden sharp knock rattled the front door. Keanu spun around, lantern trembling in his hand. The knock came again, firm, deliberate, not the wind, not imagination. No one was supposed to know he was here. No one. He set the lantern down and approached the door cautiously, each step echoing through the quiet house. His heartbeat quickened, every instinct telling him something was off. Something was wrong. Something was coming that he wasn't prepared for. Another knock, harder this time. "Who's there?" Keanu called out, voice low but steady. No answer. Just the wind picking up, howling like a warning. For a moment, Keanu didn't breathe. The voice outside was calm, professional, and unmistakably American, its clarity slicing through the Moroccan night like a blade. The desert air suddenly felt colder, pressing against the walls of the house as if it too wanted to listen. He swallowed, trying to steady the surge of adrenaline rushing through him. American? Here? At his door? Impossible. Only 2 people knew he had come to Morocco, and both of them had sworn secrecy. There was no reason, no logic, no explanation for American voices in the middle of a remote desert town, unless this wasn't random, unless they had come for him. He stepped closer to the door, keeping his voice low. "Who are you?" A brief silence. Then another voice, also a woman, firmer, carrying an authority that wasn't to be questioned. "Federal agents, Mr. Reeves, open the door." A chill crept across his spine. Federal agents didn't just appear at your doorstep halfway across the world without reason. And they definitely didn't operate this far out without heavy cause. Keanu didn't move yet. He pressed his ear to the rough wood instead. He heard the rustle of uniforms, the faint click of a radio, a whispered exchange he couldn't make out. Whoever they weren't amateurs. These weren't curious travelers or lost tourists. Their movements were precise, controlled, trained. He glanced around the room, eyes landing on a heavy iron candlestick. A weapon? No, he wasn't that man. But he needed to be cautious. "You traveled a long way," he called out. "Why?" The first voice answered, calm but urgent. "We have orders to speak with you immediately. It's in your best interest to open the door." Keanu's pulse thudded against his ribs. That doesn't tell me anything. This time, the second voice stepped closer, her tone sharp enough to cut through the thick desert silence. "Mr. Reeves, we aren't here to negotiate through a door. Either you open it voluntarily, or we come in with authorization. Understand?" He exhaled slowly. They weren't bluffing. Something very serious was happening, something he wasn't prepared for. Keanu looked toward the window. No way out. The back door? Too old, too noisy. Even if he slipped out, where would he go? Into a desert he didn't know at night with armed federal agents outside? Suicide. He placed his hand on the lock, hesitated. What if this was a setup? What if these weren't agents at all? What if this was something else, something darker? The wind pushed against the house again, whistling through the cracks like a distant warning. Finally, he turned the lock. The click echoed like thunder in the silence. He opened the door a few inches. 2 women stood outside, under the silver moonlight. Both wore tactical jackets marked with small U.S. federal insignias. Their posture was strict, practiced. One held a badge forward, illuminated by the beam of her flashlight. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said, her eyes sharp. "Agent Thomas." The lantern light trembled behind Keanu as he stepped back, allowing the 2 agents to enter. Sand drifted in with them, scattering across the old Moroccan tiles. Agent Thomas scanned the room immediately, her eyes sharp, assessing every corner, every shadow. Agent Rivera closed the door behind her, the thud echoing through the house like a judge's gavel. They didn't remove their jackets. They didn't relax. These women weren't here for casual questioning. Keanu kept a careful distance, leaning against the table for support. "All right," he said quietly. "You've come halfway around the world. Tell me what this is about." Agent Thomas exchanged a small, tense glance with Rivera. Rivera nodded lightly, giving silent permission to speak. Thomas stepped forward, her boots soft against the carpet. "There was an incident in the United States earlier this week," she began. "A serious one." "Classified for now." Keanu frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" Rivera answered instead, pulling a sealed folder from her jacket. Thick. Official, stamped with markings he didn't recognize. "Your name came up in connection to the investigation. Several times." "That's impossible," Keanu said immediately. "We don't think so," Thomas replied. She opened the folder and slid a few photographs onto the table. "But we need to ask questions, and we need you to come with us." Keanu hesitated before looking down. The pictures were grainy, taken at night, showing a figure in a black jacket entering a warehouse. The face was blurred, barely recognizable, but the posture, the walk, the frame, they could have been mistaken for his. But he knew the truth. "That's not me," he said firmly. Rivera didn't look surprised. "We figured you'd say that. But the problem is, the people who want answers don't take denials without evidence." "And what about your evidence?" Keanu countered. "You think I'd fly to Morocco if I was involved in something illegal?" Thomas's eyes softened just slightly. "Honestly? We don't think you're guilty, but Washington wants you in custody until they sort this out." Custody. The word hit him like a punch. Keanu stepped back, the room suddenly feeling too small, too hot, too heavy. "You're telling me the U.S. government thinks I'm involved in something serious enough to send agents after me?" Rivera's jaw tightened. "We didn't want to come here." "Mr. Reeves, there were other teams ready to handle this situation with force. We requested the assignment because we believed we could bring you in peacefully." His heart dropped. "So if I don't go willingly," Thomas nodded, "they'll send someone else. Someone who won't ask politely. Someone who won't care about keeping you safe." The wind moaned outside the house again, as if echoing her warning. Keanu swallowed hard. His instinct screamed to run, to hide, to question everything. But something told him these women weren't lying. Something bigger was happening. Something he wasn't being told yet. Agent Rivera placed the sealed folder back inside her jacket, as if hiding something dangerous. The air inside the Moroccan house grew thicker with every passing second. Keanu felt the weight of their silence. Pressing down on him, 2 federal agents, standing in his borrowed sanctuary, holding answers he wasn't sure he wanted. Thomas crossed her arms and leaned slightly against the wall, studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Before we move forward," she said quietly, "you need to understand exactly what you're being accused of." Keanu braced himself. "Go ahead." Rivera stepped closer to the table and opened a small case he hadn't noticed before. Inside were more documents, but unlike the earlier grainy photos, these were crisp, official, and stamped with multiple federal seals. 3 nights ago," she began, "a restricted federal research facility in Maryland was compromised. Security was disabled. Sensitive material was stolen." Keanu's brows drew together. "What kind of material?" "We can't disclose that," Thomas replied. Rivera continued, her voice steady. "Witnesses saw someone leaving the perimeter minutes after the alarm was tripped. That person resembled you, height, build, posture." Keanu stared at her in disbelief. "You think I broke into a federal facility? Me?" Thomas answered without hesitation. "The resemblance isn't the only problem." She reached into the case and pulled out a printed transcript, sliding it across the table. "Security logs show an access attempt using a digital ID created under your name." Keanu picked it up, scanning the text. His stomach dropped. His name, his details, his identity used illegally. "But I didn't do this," he said firmly, looking up. "Someone is framing me." "We believe that," Rivera admitted. "But Washington isn't convinced. They think you might be involved, either knowingly or through collaboration." Keanu shook his head, stunned. "And that's why you're here? To arrest me?" Rivera didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave him something more painful. "Honesty, there's political pressure on this. Case, high level. People want answers fast. They want a suspect faster. Your name came up too perfectly." Too conveniently, Thomas stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Mr. Reeves, we've seen cases like this. When someone goes to this much effort to impersonate you, to steal federal intel using your identity, it's because they want you removed from the picture or destroyed," Rivera added. The words hit him harder than any accusation. Someone. wasn't just framing him. Someone wanted him erased, professionally, publicly, maybe even physically. But why? He couldn't imagine a single enemy capable of orchestrating something this calculated. Keanu pressed a hand to his forehead. So what? You take me back to the U.S., lock me up, and hope everything magically sorts itself out. We take you in, Thomas said gently. Because if you stay here, you're exposed. Whoever did this may come after you next. The wind hammered the old Moroccan house like a warning drum as Keanu stood motionless, letting the agent's words sink in. The truth, or whatever version of it they were allowed to share, twisted around him like a tightening rope. No escape, no easy choice. Only consequences waiting on either side of the door. Agent Rivera took a slow step closer, her voice softened but firm. Mr. Reeves, Keanu, we need to take you into protective custody. Right now. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. Is that what you're calling it? Rivera didn't flinch. Call it whatever you want. But someone impersonated you to break into one of the most secure government facilities in the country. That's not small. That's not random. Whoever did this knew exactly how to pull strings and make you look guilty. That kind of setup doesn't stop at reputation damage, Thomas added quietly. We're here because we didn't want a tactical team showing up instead. They wouldn't bother talking. The unspoken threat chilled him more than the desert air. Keanu paced away from them, running a hand through his hair. His breath came uneven, not from panic, but from disbelief. He had faced stunts, explosions, twisted Hollywood politics, but nothing like this. This was real. This was calculated. And he had no control. No passport, no luggage, nothing extra, Rivera said. Just what you have on you. Keanu stopped pacing. You're taking me right now? Tonight? Thomas nodded once. The orders were immediate. We shouldn't even still be inside this house. We stalled as long as we could to talk first. A bitter laugh escaped him. Great, so I'm being arrested for something I didn't do. Flown across the world and thrown into an American jail. All before sunrise. Rivera's expression wavered for the first time. Sympathy breaking through her stoic. Professionalism? I'm sorry, truly, but if you stay here, you're a walking target. We can't protect you outside U.S. jurisdiction. Keanu let out a slow, defeated breath. What do you need me to do? Thomas stepped forward and pulled out a pair of handcuffs, metal, glinting under the lantern light. Standard procedure. You know how it works? His stomach tightened. The sight of the cuffs made the situation feel brutally real. Are those necessary? He asked. Rivera nodded softly. We have to follow protocol, especially with a case under federal pressure. It's not personal. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the dusty scent of the old house, memorizing it, the last breath of freedom before everything collapsed. Then, without resisting, he extended his wrists. Thomas locked the cuffs around them, not painfully tight, but firm, final. The click echoed like the snap of a closing door. Rivera stepped beside him. We'll explain more during transport. Just stay calm and stay close. Thomas opened the door. Cold desert wind rushed inside, carrying sand and stars with it. The agents guided him out, boots crunching softly across the ground. The ride from the old Moroccan house to the airstrip was silent, too silent. The SUV moved like a shadow across the desert road, its tires crunching softly over sand and gravel. Keanu sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, the dim light from the dashboard reflecting off the metal around his wrists. Agent Thomas sat beside him, watchful but calm. Rivera drove, her eyes scanning the dark horizon as if expecting trouble at any moment. The sky above them was a blanket of stars, so bright they looked like scattered diamonds. But tonight, Keanu couldn't appreciate their beauty. His thoughts raced in circles. Who framed him? Why? What was stolen? Why use his identity? Yet every question only deepened the pit in his stomach. Thomas finally spoke, her voice low. You holding up? He gave a small, humorless smile. Define holding up. She didn't laugh, but something softened in her expression. I know this is surreal, but once we land in the States, we'll get you a legal team. You'll have a chance to clear this up. He turned his face toward the window, watching the endless dunes slide by. You sound like you've said that before. Rivera answered from the front. We've handled people who were framed. Sometimes it ends well, and sometimes Keanu asked. Rivera didn't reply. The SUV turned off the main road, heading toward a faint glow in the distance. The airstrip, a small private runway used mostly for cargo flights and wealthy tourists. Tonight it was emptied out and secured. No staff, no bystanders, no unnecessary witnesses. As they approached, the faint outline of a jet came into view, sleek, gray, and unmarked. Engines humming softly, ready to go the moment they arrived. Keanu felt a knot tighten in his chest. Looks like you planned this pretty thoroughly. Thomas shot him a knowing look. Orders from above. They want you stateside before anyone else catches wind of this. Anyone else? Keanu repeated. Who exactly? Rivera interrupted sharply. Not now, eyes up. The tone alone made him tense. Two silhouettes emerged from the darkness near the runway lights. Armed security. American by their stance and body armor. They weren't Moroccan police. These were federal enforcement units flown in specifically for this operation. Thomas leaned closer to Keanu. When we step out, stay between us. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make sudden moves. They're here to ensure this stays clean. He nodded, jaw tight. Rivera parked near the jet, the headlights briefly illuminating the armed men before flicking off. The desert fell into deep darkness again. Thomas opened Keanu's door and guided him out. The dry wind hit his face instantly, carrying grains of sand that stung his skin. The armed men stepped forward, examining him with cold, unreadable gazes. One said, "Confirm identity." Keanu Reeves. Thomas replied, "In custody." Cleared for transfer, the man nodded and stepped aside. Rivera walked at Keanu's other side as they approached the jet. Hours passed in a blur of dim cabin lights, muted engine hum, and tension so thick it tightened the air. Keanu sat strapped into his seat near the center of the jet, wrists still cuffed, though Thomas had loosened them slightly when the plane leveled off. Rivera sat across from him, arms crossed, boots planted firmly on the floor. Neither agent had slept. Neither had relaxed. Keanu tried, but his thoughts were a storm he couldn't outrun. America. He was going back to America not as a citizen, not as a beloved actor, not even as a witness, but as a suspect. The idea gnawed at him. At some point, the sun began to rise, throwing stripes of pale gold across the cabin windows. Rivera checked her watch, then nodded toward Thomas. Descending in 5. Keanu's heart thudded. That fast? Thomas gave him a look that wasn't unkind. We're coming in on a restricted route. They don't want attention. Attention, he repeated with a bitter breath. Right. The intercom crackled. Prepare for landing. Rivera stood and tightened her vest. Stay calm. When we land, things will move quickly. Thomas added, stay close to us. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't react to anything. Why? Keanu asked, a knot forming in his chest. Rivera answered quietly, because this arrival isn't private. Before he could ask what she meant, the jet dipped lower. Through the window, Keanu saw the unmistakable sprawl of New York City, looming beneath thick morning clouds. The skyline rose like steel teeth, sharp and cold. The jet approached JFK Airport, but not the commercial terminals. Instead, it headed toward a restricted federal tarmac, a separate world from the chaos of passengers, luggage carts, and flashing screens. This place was silent, empty, waiting. The wheels hit the runway with a heavy jolt. The engine slowed. The jet rolled into a corner of the airfield where several black SUVs and an armored transport van waited, engines idling, tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. Keanu felt his pulse kick. That's a lot of vehicles for a guy who's supposed to be innocent. Rivera didn't react. Protocol, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The plane door opened with a hiss. Cold New York air flooded in, sharper, heavier, completely different from Morocco's warm desert breeze. Thomas stood beside Keanu, gently taking his arm. You ready? She asked softly. No, he said honestly. But go ahead. Rivera led the way down the ramp. Keanu followed, sandwiched between the agents. The bright morning light made him squint as soon as his boots hit the ground. Several agents in tactical gear stepped forward. They formed a perimeter around him, blocking any view from the rest of the airport. One of them murmured into a radio package secured Keanu's stiffened package, he muttered. Thomas whispered, ignore it. They guided him toward the armored transport van. But before he reached it, a man in a suit approached, stern, polished, clearly a higher-ranking official. The armored van rumbled through the industrial outskirts of Queens, its interior dark except for a single strip of flickering light. Keanu sat alone on a metal bench, hands still cuffed, the cold biting into his wrists every time the vehicle hit a bump. He'd been in film sets, stunt rigs, even cramped trailers. But nothing felt as claustrophobic as this. Every sound echoed, the engine's low growl, the rattling ventilation fan, the muffled radio chatter between the escort vehicles. Occasionally, he heard sirens in the distance, but none drew close. Whatever route they were taking was controlled, isolated, planned. How long had he been here? Minutes? Half an hour? Time didn't feel normal anymore. The van finally slowed. Through a narrow slit in the door, Keanu glimpsed a series of concrete barriers, a towering metal gate, and a grim complex sunk behind layers of razor wire. It wasn't Rikers Island. It wasn't any jail he recognized. It looked federal. It looked secret. The gate opened with a heavy mechanical groan, swallowing the van into a fortified compound. Armed guards stood at every corner. Floodlights remained on despite the bright morning, as if the place refused to recognize daylight. The van came to a stop. The locks clacked. The door swung open. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, neither Rivera nor Thomas. These were facility officers, faces blank, movements practiced. "Reeves, step out!" Keanu lowered himself from the van, boots touching cold concrete. The air smelled of disinfectant and metal. His breath fogged slightly. It was colder here than outside. One officer scanned his wristband. ID confirmed. Taking him to intake, Keanu forced his voice steady. "Can someone tell me what I'm being charged with?" The officer didn't look up. "Not my department." "Then whose department is it?" The officer stared at him for a moment with eyes that betrayed nothing. "You'll be briefed." That wasn't an answer. They guided him through a security checkpoint, past full-body scanners and reinforced doors. The hallways were sterile, gray floors, white walls, harsh overhead lights. Everything buzzed faintly, like an electrical hum beneath the silence. Keanu counted the turns they took. Left, right, straight, another right. A maze. They finally reached a processing room. A glass enclosure watched from above. Silhouettes of staff moving behind tinted windows. The officers removed his cuffs but replaced them with heavier restraints. "Sit," one instructed. He did. Across the room, a clerk typed rapidly at a terminal. "Keanu Reeves. Federal hold order. Sealed classified directive." His voice trailed off, eyebrows tightening. Then he said quieter, "I've never seen this level of classification for a civilian." Keanu felt a chill. "What does it mean?" "Means someone big wants you locked down." Before he could ask more, a door opened. Rivera and Thomas entered, expressions hard, almost grim. They approached him quickly. They marched Keanu down a long, narrow corridor that hummed with the steady pulse of fluorescent lights. The floor felt colder with each step, echoing the metallic clink of his restraints. This part of the facility was different, quieter, more secure. The kind of place designed not for criminals, but for secrets. A reinforced door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. "Cell 47, the officer grunted. "Special containment." Keanu stepped inside. The cell was small but unnervingly clean. A concrete bed, a metal toilet, a single bolted-down table. No bars, just a thick, soundproof door with a tiny window. A camera blinked from the corner, watching every breath he took. The door shut behind him with a deep, final thud. Silence. Real silence. He sat slowly on the edge of the concrete bed. His mind raced. Why here? Why him? Why accusations of something impossible, an event that hadn't even happened yet? He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had pressed deep lines into the skin. His pulse felt uneven, a rhythm out of sync with reality. The overhead light flickered once, then stabilized. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. It was impossible to tell. Then, a faint click. A slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of eyes staring at him from the hallway. Not hostile, not official, curious, maybe concerned. A voice whispered through the gap. "Reeves, you awake?" Keanu stood wary. "Who are you?" "Name's Malik, guard on night rotation." He sounded young. "Maybe early 30s. I'm not supposed to talk to you, but people here are scared. And when people are scared, they treat the unknown like it's dangerous. Keanu frowned. So they think I'm the danger. Not you, Malik whispered. What you're connected to. Keanu felt his chest tighten. Connected to what? Malik glanced over his shoulder before continuing. You didn't hear this from me, but a classified alert went out 2 days ago about a potential national threat. No details, no description, just one name attached to the predictive analysis. He paused. Yours. Keanu stared at the slot. Predictive analysis, like some kind of algorithm? More than algorithm, Malik said. They're using a system that claims to forecast high-impact events before they occur. Your name popped up in the center of it. So the agency's panicked. Keanu backed away from the door, breath catching. This is insane. They dragged me out of Morocco based on a computer prediction? It's the kind of tech you don't question, Malik whispered. Too many powerful people trust it. Does Rivera know, Thomas? They know more than they're allowed to say. As suddenly as he appeared, Malik withdrew. Lights out in 10. Get some rest, if you can. The slot closed. Keanu stood in the center of the cell, heart pounding. The idea that an unseen system, an algorithm, a machine, could decide he was guilty of something he didn't even know about was more terrifying than any enemy he'd faced.